You're watching Informed TV, Alexandria, Minnesota.
And he did presentation when we were down there and everything. Linda was able to attend his class. And it's interesting what the carp do. And that's what we're going to hear about today and everything. So, I'm going to slaughter his name. Shemek Bajur. And he will take and tell you everything there is to know about carp. Go for it.
I'll try. This is meant to be informal, but I thought that it might be better if I go through the talk first, and then we can spend time on questions and explaining things. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's always fun to go and present the results of our research in front of groups like these. Some of you had a chance to see parts of this talk about a month ago at the U of M. I wonder if we should maybe dim the lights a little bit. I don't know if you can see it okay, or I have about 30 some slides. It's going to be about half an hour. I hope it's not too long. And the very last bit of it is about your lakes. I tried to pull data from the website, just kind of do a little detective work to figure out, I guess, what's going on with carp in your lakes, because every lake chain is slightly different. Okay, so this is about the common carp, which is considered to be one of the most invasive fish in the world. It's not only in the US, but really worldwide. But if you look across the globe, there's two main areas. One is the US and Australia, by far the worst places in terms of carp abundance and damage that they cause. It is widely distributed. It is a large, as you know, minnow from Eurasia or Eastern Europe, really, this area here, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea. This is sort of its home, Caspian Sea and the Volga River, which is the longest river of Europe. Those fish, the carp here in this area, they're considered lake fish. They're most abundant in lakes, but their home range, they are kind of a river fish. They like river habitats. They tend to conduct very long spawning migrations, sometimes hundreds of miles upstream, kind of like salmon. So that's what they evolve. They're very large, mobile fish that evolve in this sort of large and seasonally unstable environment. Like here, in this area, winters are kind of cold. There's a lot of snow and ice, and summers are kind of hot, just like here. They were introduced in late 1800s on purpose because the settlers from Europe wanted them. They liked the fish back home, and back then nobody knew that carp could become so abundant. They're not really abundant in their home area, like in the Volga or in the Danube. They're actually kind of declining, the wild carp, and a lot of the places are stocked to maintain those populations. So people thought, well, just bring those fish over here, we'll have a few of them, we like to catch them. Some people like to eat them. What's the problem, right? And the US Fisheries Commission decided to go along with that idea, and they tried once. I think that failed, and they tried another second time. They brought 340 some carp from Germany, and those fish survived, and they were kept in Washington, D.C. for 2 years to breed and produce young. And the demand was huge for those fish, so special railroad cars were built and used to transport the small carp throughout the country. And now we have them everywhere. And soon after that, late 1900s, there were reports from Minnesota and other places that, oh boy, what have we done? The fish are getting out of control. The waterfowl is getting, the habitat for the waterfowl is getting decimated. And so it became clear right away that something wrong has happened. And I already said that they're widely distributed and very abundant. And this is why carp are an issue. I hope this will work. Because they dig in the bottom. They have this habit of looking for food in the sediments. They have those little whiskers with taste buds, and they look for little insect larvae in the bottom. And you see those clouds of mud that they release with the gills. That's one of the main problems. They tend to make water more muddy, turbid. they tend to uproot aquatic vegetation. So a good sign that you have a lake with a carp problem is that there's almost no vegetation in the lake. That's often what happens. And on top of that, that top layer of water that's sitting inside the sediments is actually, it's usually very rich in nutrients, especially phosphorus. So anything that disturbs it tends to release those nutrients back in the water, and that feeds the algae, and then water tends to be green, and that shades the plants even more, and the cycle sort of continues. So in some places, carp are believed to pump nutrients from the sediments into the water column. Not always, but sometimes. And these are sort of the relationships between carp biomass and the damage they cause. This is a study that we did in a shallow lake in Illinois a few years back. So on top you see carp biomass going up. So this is 2001 when the lake was invaded, 2007. And then the second panel shows vegetation cover, which is vegetation density, number of vegetation species, and number of waterfowl in the fall, in thousands. So as you can see, as carp biomass goes up, the vegetation goes down and the waterfowl goes down. And that's been seen throughout the whole country, basically, in many different places. What's interesting here on the top one is that if you have, few carp, like maybe 50 kilograms per hectare, or maybe even 100, that's no big deal. I mean, that's okay. The problem is that sometimes they go into several hundreds of kilograms per hectare, of 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 off that scale, and then you see this kind of thing. So uprooted vegetation, turbid water, high phosphorus. This is another example from Lake Susan that's in the Twin Cities area, and just to demonstrate that removing carp from different ecosystem has benefits, but those benefits differ among different places. So like the top one would suggest that, if you remove them from this lake, you would see increased vegetation, increased waterfowl production. This one, that was very shallow lake. This one here, Lake Susan, is a different type of lake. It's maybe just a couple hundred acres in size, a small lake, but fairly deep. Well, for that size of lake, maybe 25 feet or so. So it stratifies in the summer. So in this lake, the carp are mainly along the shoreline. They are not using the entire surface of the lake. So we removed the carp from that lake, and the biomass reduced from about 300 pounds per acre or kilograms per hectare, it's the same, to about 60. And what we've observed is that water clarity increased a lot. This is after the fish were removed, and this is how clear the water is in meters. And this is before. So we did see a big jump in water clarity, but in May and June, not so much in the summer. Because stratified lakes, like this one, lakes where you have warm water on top and cold water on the bottom, the phosphorus cycles that tend to be driven by different things than carp. We also saw an increase in aquatic vegetation in Lake Susan. That's very consistent between lakes. So, like lake ecologists, like myself, we like to see vegetation in lakes. Not everybody likes to see a lot of vegetation in lakes. So just to let you know that this is typically what happens when you control carp. You will see an increase in vegetation, usually along the shoreline. And that's why you see clearer water, because vegetation tends to promote water clarity, because it provides refugia for zooplankton and then keeps the sediments more stable. This is a very useful graph, because it shows you how many carp is too many in the lake. Because if you look at the carp biomass here versus vegetation density, it's a pretty clear relationship. So looking at the data, we concluded that if you have fewer carp than 100 kilos per hectare or pounds per acre, then you're fine. If you have more than this, then you're in trouble. And now we have relatively quick assessment methods that you can go out on the lake with an electrofishing boat 3 or 4 times, go around the lake, count the number of fish you catch, and you can estimate whether you're here or here or here, just to see if you have carp problem or not. And this is sort of a big one, because a lot of lakes lake associations are interested in phosphorus. You hear about TMDLs, phosphorus loads. And the effects of carp on phosphorus are not that clear. If you look at published data from lab experiments, there's about 50 of them, and almost every single one says, yes, carp have big effects on phosphorus that cause phosphorus to go up. But if you actually look at the data that were from whole lake experiments, where you have a whole lake from which carp were removed, and you look at before versus after, the results are more mixed. So for example, in stratified lake like Lake Susan, where we removed the carp, the phosphorus didn't change. In shallow lakes, like this marsh in Iowa, where they removed carp by poisoning the whole lake, the phosphorus dropped, I don't remember exactly, but at least 50%, I mean, dropped a lot. And the same is sort of observed in some of the shallow lakes in Minnesota that DNR manages for waterfowl. When they kill carp and bottom, fish with rotten on, usually the phosphorus goes down. So I think, my honest answer is, it's not as easy as we think. I think there is a fairly strong indication that they do increase phosphorus in shallow lakes or lakes that mix. And because a lot of your lakes, I think, I looked at some, Mary, for example, I think is only 40 feet deep, but it's big. And I think most of it will probably mix to the bottom. So carp may have a substantial effect here, but again, it's. And another benefit is that native fish tend to grow faster once you remove the carp. And I don't have good data on this because actually there aren't, or there isn't that much data. But we did see in Lake Susan, in that metro lake where we removed the carp, the bluegills especially started growing really fast. Now they got fished out really fast too, but the growth rates were really, really impressive. And it makes sense. I mean, it's a productive lake somebody has to use. And carp use a lot of the same food that native fish would use otherwise, so they compete directly. With bluegills, for example, they both eat insects larvae, except that carp will look for them on the bottom, and bluegills look for them when they're hatching. They're sort of ascending in the water. So there was a lot of interest in controlling carp populations for different reasons. And I think it's fair to say that the control methods that have been developed are kind of relatively simple, and they usually don't work. I will say, though, that the DNR has figured out a way to manage waterfowl lakes in a fairly successful way, but they can only manage lakes that can be isolated and drained. So basically what happens is a shallow lake, they put a barrier at the outlet, drain the lake, freezes to the bottom. And I think what's needed is management strategies that could be used in more broader, larger systems of lakes that you cannot simply isolate with barriers and drain. And that's where some of the science comes in. So I hope this is spelled correctly. For the past few years, we have been looking for Achilles heel in carp life cycle. Because yes, they are invasive in a lot of places, but they're not invasive in a whole bunch of places too. So there are some things that control their abundance in a natural way, and it's about finding those natural control mechanisms. So that's what we did. We started in 2006, and we sort of thought, well, let's look at the whole cycle of the population. So we have the adults. Those are the fish that everybody sees, the big carp. We know that they spawn. You can see them splashing in the shallows in May and June, I'm sure. But this is sort of the big mystery. We didn't really know what's happening with the eggs, and they have lots of eggs. A female can have 1 million eggs or more. They're tiny. They're like a grain of sand, maybe slightly larger. They don't protect the eggs. They just spread them in vegetation. The eggs stick to plants. They sit on plants for usually 3 to 5 days. They hatch. The larvae are tiny. They are maybe 1/4 of an inch long, really, really tiny. They eat tiny things. And if they survive, they grow into juveniles, and then these guys mature and become adults. But while the adult carp sort of part of this puzzle is fairly well understood and documented, there is actually very little information on this. Like, how do the eggs survive, how many, when, who controls the survival of eggs and larvae. and what's going on with those small carp. Because even in natural lakes, we sample a lot of lakes and you see the big carp everywhere, but you very rarely find small carp. And there is a reason for that. So, first thing we looked at is spawning. Because if you have a problem, you kind of have to figure out the source. And the source is the young fish. Where do the young ones, where are they coming from? So this is what we call recruitment, which is survival of the eggs and the larvae in the fry. So first thing we did was we looked in the chain of lakes in the metro area. That's Lake Susan that I was showing the water quality data from. So we picked a chain of 3 lakes, and each one is slightly different. So Lake Susan is, they're all small lakes, it's easy to study. Lake Susan is maybe, like I said, a couple hundred acres in size, 20 or so feet deep. Rice Marsh Lake is about the same size, but it's only about 10 feet deep, so it's like a marsh. And Lake Riley is slightly bigger, and this one is almost 60 feet deep. So 3 different lakes. And what we did was we put radio transmitters in carp throughout the whole system. I don't know, about 15 to 20 in each lake. And we did that in April, and just a month later, in May, we realized that what happens is a lot of fish from this lake and from that lake, they all go to the marsh to spawn at the same time. That's when you see the dots mixing. And about a month later, they split and they go back to the home lakes. And we've been looking at that system for many years now, using radio tagged fish and also hundreds of tagged fish, and we have never seen a fish from Riley going to Susan and from Susan going to Riley. They all go to the marsh to spawn and they split perfectly, and they do it every year. So there are a couple interesting things. One is that they move, and sometimes up to half of the fish from a lake will go to the marsh to spawn, and then they come back. Sometimes they move upstream, like here, and sometimes they move downstream. The water flows this way. They don't make mistakes. They know where they're going, so they remember where things are. And what we found out later was that they tend to go to the places where they were born. So they're going to the marsh because that's where they came from. And this is a picture of the spawning migration of carp. I'm sure you've seen that, culverts, sort of fish barriers. You see them piling up in usually early May after a sort of warm, rainy day. This is just a picture of one that's trying to jump over the fence. And again, this is coming back to their home, the native habitat, the Volga River. They're made for those long distance migrations. That's what they do. And this is another picture. I don't know if you can see it, but all those shadows in the water are carp. And in this particular case, it's a small lake, only about 200 acres, but it's got 26,000 adult carp. And in this lake, 90 or more, up to 98% of the fish move from the lake to the marsh in one day. And they spawn, and then like a couple of weeks later, they're back. And if we didn't use radio tags, you wouldn't even know that because you don't see them. We saw their movement using radio tags, telemetry, and then we put the fence in the stream so that we could really count them and see if that's true. And yeah, they do that every year. So they move a lot. But then we figured out, why do they move? So they migrate because they're looking for lakes that winter kill. Because it turns out that the larvae and eggs cannot survive in most lakes. In a typical lake that is dominated by typical native fish like bluegills and crappies and perch and walleye and bass, the carp will be spawning in that lake, but we never found a small carp in those lakes. And we've looked at a couple dozen lakes for several years now, and you see them spawning every single year, but there's no young. And this graph shows, so each dot is a lake. And what we're looking at here is the number of young carp. This is young of the year carp that were caught in a trap net in that lake. And this is wintertime dissolved oxygen. So these are lakes where dissolved oxygen is higher than 2 milligrams per liter. So those are typical lakes that don't winter kill. So like Lake Mad is probably, a lake like this. I would guess it would be somewhere in this range. So these lakes are fine. They're all on the 0 line. They don't have any young of the year carp. Now these lakes, they tend to have a lot of young of the year carp. 10, 100, or sometimes even a couple hundred per small trout net. And all of these are here, meaning that their wintertime dissolved oxygen was 1 or less, and that's when lakes winter kill. And then we figured out that what happens is bluegills are very sensitive to lack of oxygen, and they are one of the first native fish to die. And if they're gone, there is nothing to eat the eggs, nobody to eat the eggs and the larvae, and that's why the young carp survive. But if they survive, which is in these lakes with high oxygen, they can eat the eggs and the larvae, and that's why we don't see young of the year carp in those lakes. They actually control the carp reproductive cycle. So that's great. So that's one weakness that is present in most lakes, but there's still those lakes that winter kill. They can become nurseries for entire chains of lakes. And this is just a couple examples. So I said carp do well in an interconnected system of lakes and marshes because they have deep lakes where they can spend their winters. They're perfectly fine. And then spring comes, they move out of those deep lakes, going back to the marsh where they were born, and then they come back. And the cycle continues. So they do really well in chains of lakes where you have a deep lake and a shallow lake. So this is Riley Creek chain of lakes. These are all metro lakes. And in this particular, I just realized I have laser. So this is the Riley Creek chain of lakes. And it's 5 lakes, but only 1 marsh. This is the only nursery for that entire chain of lakes. This is another chain of lakes called Purgatory Creek chain of lakes. And it's more lakes, but this one has also only 1 carp nursery. So this area feeds the whole chain, and this area feeds the whole chain. So if you can find those nurseries and somehow manage them, that's usually the key to successful carp management throughout the entire chains of lakes. Because if you don't somehow manage the reproductive output, the number of young carp, it's very difficult to control carp in a sustainable way. So we found where the nurseries are. Those are the lakes that winter kill. But then the next step is, okay, so we know that if you go to a place that winter killed, say in July or August, and you put a trap in it, and you pull it out the next day, you see hundreds of carp inside, and they're usually about that big, you know, the 8 zeros. For them to become a problem for the whole chain of lakes, they have to move out of those places, right? The good news is that we don't know why, but they tend not to move out during the first year of life or even the second year of life. For whatever reason, they just like to sit in those marshes. And then when they're age 2, they start moving around. And this is just, I don't have that example, but we looked at the length data from different lakes. We tracked those individual fish by putting tiny little tags in them and putting antennas in the stream on the upstream side of the marsh and downstream. And it usually, during that second or the third year of life, you see huge numbers of them moving out of those marshes. The good news is that they're sitting here for a year or 2. You have a bit of, you have more time to deal with them. Sometimes you can do things to deal with them, sometimes you can't, but at least, in some places. The worst case scenario would be if you have, and just to give you an example, a lake like this, which is 300 acres, may have 20,000 adult carp. A marsh of the same size can have maybe 200,000 or 400,000 A0 carp. So this is like a ticking bomb. If they were moving out of the places immediately, then it would be really bad. But they're not, so that's a good news. So this is this is this parasol, the juvenile. So this is just one example, and it's actually this system. It's a lake and a marsh. And what happens here is we were looking at length data. So we have the marsh, or we call it wetland, and we have the lake. So this is fall 2010, fall 2010, fall 2011, 11, 12, 12, 13. So there was a big group of those small carp born in the marsh in 2010, but we didn't see them going to the lake until this is so this is March 2010. They're here. This is late 2010. Not really here. There's a small blip. This is the wetland 2011. These guys grew a little bit, but we're still not seeing them in large number in the lake. This is the wetland 2012. Yeah, they grew even more. That's this group. These guys, these guys, these guys. And now we're seeing them in the lake. And then in the fall of 2012, about half of the population about doubled in the lake, because these are all of those little fish that came all the way from here. So it took them 2 years to finally move out of the lake and of the marsh and get into the lake. And we have more examples from different lakes like that. So the final part of controlling carp is dealing with the adults, because they can live for decades. Sometimes we do a lot of fish aging, carp aging. We catch the fish and we remove their ear bones, the inner ear bones, the oglets, and we slice them, put them under a microscope, and you see growth rings just like on a tree, and you can count them. And sometimes we count them, we're like, this is not possible. I mean, this fish is 65 years old or 70. They can be really, really old if they find, a nice deep lake to spend winters in. So if you don't deal with them, they'll be around for a while. Fortunately, there are ways to remove adult carp from lakes in a very effective and targeted way without harming native fish. And we don't know exactly why, but carp form those huge aggregations under the ice. We don't know what causes it, but they form year after year, usually in the same places. And this is just one example from one lake. This is Lake Riley from one of those chains of lakes that I described. So these dots are radio tagged fish. So each carp carries a radio transmitter, and we go out every couple of weeks just to find where they are. If we did this in July, they will be around the shoreline, pretty much around the whole lake. This is November, and you start seeing there's a group here and a group here. This is December, the group here grew bigger. This is January, all of them are here. And commercial fishermen have been exploiting that behavior for decades. They know where the carp aggregate and how to get them. We have improved that because we can really find where they are using radio tags. And actually, we've been working with some commercial fishermen in the metro area. And now, when they work with us, they used to use sonars to find where the fish are. Now they go to us and they say, tell me where the fish are, and we put plastic cones on the ice. And they often don't even double check if the fish are there, because they know that, if you find a bunch of radio tagged fish in the area, it's hard to argue with that. So it's an effective way of finding those aggregations. And then once we find them, they cut, a big hole in the ice, and they put those little submarines under the ice, and they pull ropes on both sides of the aggregation, and then they pull net around the fish, and if that's what it looks like, and if everything goes well, we catch a lot of carp. And we did quite a bit of stuff in those small lakes. We pick small lakes because we can count how many fish there are, so we know how successful this is. And you can remove up to 90% of adults from a lake in one seine hole. And again, I'm not talking about lakes that are thousands of acres in size. These are metro lakes that may be a few hundred acres in size, but nonetheless, this can be very effective. So there are at least 4 weaknesses that we have identified. One is, and this is the big one, that the eggs and larvae are unlikely to survive in lakes dominated by bluegills and other native fish. So that's great. If you could keep bluegills in every single lake, the carp problem would be probably much less. Unfortunately, some of the lakes winter kill, bluegills die, and those are the nurseries that carp exploit. Another good news is that those little guys, it takes them about 2 years to move out of those nurseries and go into other lakes. And finally, even if they do go to other lakes and mature and become adults, they can be removed using winter staging with radio telemetry. So this is just 2 quick examples. Again, the same chains of lakes. Just to show you that well, maybe not every, but lake chains are different, and different places require different solutions. And sometimes we do sort of opposite things to achieve the same end result. And this is Riley Creek chain of lakes. Like I said, only one nursery here, the lake that winter kills. But this place is about 10 feet deep. It's deep enough so that it can be aerated during winter to keep the bluegills and all the other fish alive. And we recommended that to the watershed district, and they put an aeration system in the marsh, I believe in 2009 or 10. And the lake hasn't winter killed since. And this one actually has been aerated by the city since 1991. And this used to be a very productive carp nursery, but it hasn't been since the 90s. So I guess there used to be 2 nurseries here. Now they're both being aerated now. And there's no more carp recruitment. We've been looking at that place for several years. We're not finding any small carp. And meanwhile, we've been using telemetry to remove adults from here, here, and here. And we fish down the whole chain of lakes. So this is where we started, some of the lakes. Again, the numbers are not as huge as probably in your lakes because the lakes are smaller. These are just thousands of carp in the lake. So this would be Susan and Riley. And we started 2008. We did winter removal of telemetry, and now we are at this level that is no longer damaging to the lake. So this is below the 100 kilograms per hectare. In 2014, we began somewhere here. And we haven't done anything since here. The only thing that's going on is the winter aeration, and that's it. We're not doing anything else. But this is relatively easy. This is sort of the best case scenario. This is another chain, more complicated. The problem really is here. This is a super productive carp nursery, and this lake is loaded with carp. There is a barrier here so that they can't really go upstream. So we kind of focus on this place. Now, this is different because this area is only 3 to 4 feet deep. You cannot do winter aeration in a place like this just too shallow. So what we decided is if we cannot keep it alive, we'll just kill it every year. Because we know that those little guys, even though they're born and they survive here every single year, they are not leaving, right? Because they stay. So if we can drain the water a little bit and freeze it, we should be able to control most of them. And it just happens that there was a water level sort of control structure here that the city is able to work with, and they started winter drawdown, I think 2 winters ago, and meanwhile we were doing the removal of adults here, and well, this is where we are. So we started with about 26,000 carp in the lake, and now we're about here, so we're about 5,000 to 6,000 left, which is still too many. This lake can tolerate about 1,000 carp. That's it. So we are on the way, but we're not there yet. But we've made quite a bit of progress. And I think another thing that I haven't showed here is, because we have so much data for those lakes now, we actually developed a model that can track every single carp as they move through those lakes, and whether they survive or not, whether they grow or not, whether they can find a lake that winter killed or not, whether they have babies or not, and how many of those babies survive or move or not. So we can model the whole movement and survival and abundance in entire chains of lakes. And if we look at this, if we plug realistic management scenarios through this model, it looks that we should be able to get the population down to the level that is no longer damaging to water quality. That's why we'll keep going with this. I bet that there are systems that if you plug them, put them in the model and you try to control the carp, it will tell you that with whatever we have now, it's just not doable. Because, for example, in some lakes, one female can have so many young carp that even if you remove 70 or 80% of adults from the whole lake every single year, it still will not work. So you kind of have to look at the system and really understand how it's working, how many nurseries you have, how the fish move around, before you can kind of figure out if there's a chance that you can control it. Now, there's new science coming up with toxins and genetically modified fish that is not going to be used for years at least, but it's being developed. This could offer solutions for really sort of tough cases, but it's not there yet. So, this is your chain of lakes. I don't know anything about it, but I thought I would sort of look it up to see what I can find. So this is Lake Mary, right? And I was trying to figure out if the water flows this way or this way. I think it flows somewhere this way.
North.
North, okay.
Northwest.
North. Yeah, west first, then north.
West first and north. Where's that slough that we stopped by here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So it flows through here, kind of somewhere?
Yeah, there you go.
I see. Well, so there is quite a few lakes in this area, and some of them are big and some are small, some are deep, some are shallow. Just anecdotally, you guys are seeing carp moving through the system. So movement usually indicates that they're not born in the lake. They're going back to where they were born. So if they're moving between lakes, they were born in some other lake. So that's usually kind of a good indicator. That's actually good news because that means that they're not coming from this lake. They're coming from some other lakes. So I looked at, so it's a pretty deep, pretty large lake, about 2,400 acres?
Yep, approximately.
40 feet deep?
That hurts.
Yeah, that's maximum there. Yeah. Looked at water clarity. There is a lot of good data on the DNR Lake Finder website. So this is all from that site. It looks like recently it's been kind of not great. Maybe 3 or 4 feet in the summer. I don't know how reliable this data is, but there's a pretty big change since 1990. But then it was bad, better, worse again. I'm always interested in phosphorus because that's what drives water clarity. And carp tend to do really good in lakes that are turbid, green, and have a lot of phosphorus. And your lake has a lot of phosphorus.
Ditch 9.
Yes.
So this is, for example, 27, 24, 27, 20s or 30s. If it's higher than 10, it's very productive. A lot of the metro lakes are in the, this is milligrams per liter. In micrograms per liter would be 100. So this would be like 300, this would be 270, this would be 240. Some of the metro lakes, it's like 100, 110, 120, that's high. So you have a lot of phosphorus, at least twice as high as the metro lakes. Not surprising, and it's a very productive soils, it's just the way it is. Sort of good news here is that I looked at the dissolved oxygen profiles because it's important to know whether a lake stratifies or whether it mixes to the bottom. I think if it's well mixed, then if you control the carp in that lake, you'll probably see more benefits in terms of water clarity and phosphorus. So I don't know if it mixes to the bottom or not, but I looked at, for example, it's usually good to look at the data from the middle of the summer. So this is July 25th, 2005. 0 meters, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is about 12 or 15 feet. So it's not all the way to the bottom, but it's oxygen is kind of high and relatively well mixed. So I don't know if you know if the lake mixes to the bottom or not, but it suggests that quite a bit of it probably does because it's a very big and open lake. This is 2013 fish survey conducted by the DNR. So the lake is pretty good walleye and black crappie fishery, as I understand. So these are walleyes, 10 per gill net. Normal range is 3 to 8, so you guys are better than most, I guess. Average fish weight. This is carp. I tend not to put a lot of weight on these data because adult carp are very tricky to catch, and they're just smart. They just don't go into nets. Sometimes we know that there's a lot of them in the lake because we mark them with different tags, and we set nets and we catch none. But this is gill net catch rate. It's about 0.73 fish per net on average, and the normal range is 0.2 to 1. So this would at least suggest that you're sort of towards the upper end of the range, which suggests that, yeah, there's probably a decent population of carp in the lake. The good news is that if you look at the lengths of the fish, and again, this is from the DNR surveys, so this is carp. So these are length. This is 0 to 5 inches, 6 to 8, 9 to 11. There are no carp here. The smallest one they caught was between 15 and 19 inches, and most of them are 20 and upper 20s. So these are big fish. These are probably old fish. So, you know, if you were dealing with a nursery lake, you would see almost none of this and lots of these guys here. So that kind of makes sense that now that they're moving out of the lake looking for other places, because this is not a good nursery for them. There's too many other fish. Okay, so just a quick summary. It looks like you have a large, shallow, very productive lake. It's a good walleye, black crappie fishery, probably other fish too. It looks like there's at least moderate density of carp. It could be huge, it could be, I don't know, it's just looking at the data. There's no small carp caught in the fish survey, so they're probably coming from somewhere else. That's good news. I don't think it winter kills, I'm sure it doesn't, so that's good. Pool water clarity, how much carp contribute to that? I don't know. I would guess it's probably, it's really hard to say. If you remove the carp, for sure what would happen is you would see more vegetation. The water would clear up. Whether the phosphorus would decrease a lot, I don't know. Whether the water would clear up in the spring and in the summer, and I think that this is kind of important because the lake is big and it looks like it's connected. Controlling carp here would probably require quite a bit of effort and just kind of trying to understand a little bit better how they move around and where the nurseries are. Now, you may be dealing with, I don't know if Mary is sort of on top of the watershed or not.
We're not in the beginning, but we're fairly close.
So, you
Very
know,
close to the
perhaps
beginning.
the upper part could be isolated with some sort of a bed, and then you could just deal with what's in Mary and upstream. That could be doable. So again, it just depends on what's upstream. And that's all I have. So, you know, I presented a bunch of my data, but there's been a lot of people involved with this. We've been working on this since 2006. We have several papers published on that. If you're interested, I can send them to you. A lot of students and postdocs. These are my two full-time technicians, Mary and Brett. They collected most of the data. Here's Nate, here's Joey, my grad student. This has been a collective effort. So, that's all I have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions related to carp.
You're watching Informed TV, Alexandria, Minnesota.
Welcome to the Depot Express. If you're ever in Alexandria, please stop by. Nightly specials and happy hour 7 days a week. Come enjoy our upstairs entertainment. We have pool tables, dartboards, jukebox. We have a DJ every weekend. And we have our huge salad bar available 7 days a week. Come join us for a meal in our spacious downstairs dining room. If you have a larger group, we can accommodate you in our upstairs dining area. You can seat about 75 people up here.
Hi, I'm Justin Greeley with Greeley Plumbing Heating in Glenwood and Alexandria, your local Bryan factory authorized dealer looking to service all your plumbing heating needs. Our number is 320-763-7333 or in Glenwood 320-634-4486. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lane Kalina, General Manager of Farmers Union Oil Company in Alexandria. We have a location also in Garfield, convenience store. We deal in bulk fuels, propane. We have 2 convenience stores, a full service shop, tire department. And whenever you're coming by our location on Broadway or Garfield, we invite you to stop in and check out all the things we have to offer. We are a cooperative and we do pay dividends to our customers, and it is a true locally owned co-op where we are self-sufficient. We're owned by our members, And all dividends, anything that's made here is paid back to our customers. So stop in and check us out and buy a tank of gas.
Remember to get your tanks filled at Phoenix and Alexandria.
How do we go about finding that nursery?
I would probably talk to the DNR,
Okay,
ask for lakes that winter kill, and those young carp are pretty easy to catch.
okay.
So using pretty standard, typical trap nets, you set the net in a lake, you pull it the next day, and or even shore seines, like beach seines. They're very abundant. Usually we go with just loads of them. So, but I would talk to the DNR. When we started this project, I didn't know about it. They told me, they say, go look for those places that winter kill because that's where we find them. So they know.
A lot of the stuff you've been seeing makes a lot of sense. Our lake is about 20 miles west of here. There's no inlet to our lake, one outlet. And we had a carp issue, and 4 years ago we had them netted out. We got 80,000 pounds in one netting. And ever since that happened, things have changed. Our game fish especially, everything's increased, everything's getting bigger. And the nursery, I didn't know anything about that before, but it makes sense. We have a slough, it's probably only about 5 acres, but it's real shallow. And in the summertime, it's just loaded with carp. And we never see the small carp coming back into the lake. When I see the fish coming in there, they're probably in like 3-4 pound
Yes.
weight. And we've been wondering where's the little ones? We don't see them. What's going on here? So that kind of explains a lot of it. And our phosphorus has went way down also. But our weed growth hasn't came back yet. We're hoping that comes back, but the lake has improved since we've had that done, and we have a fishery outfit that comes in there every year and sonars it for us. And they all stage, just like you were saying, they stage in one place place only. And he comes there and he takes his sonar, and luckily the last 2 years he hasn't found any.
I'm glad to hear that the phosphorus went down because there's a lot of data or suggestions from those small experiments that it should go down, which would be great. But some of those large lake experiments are sort of mixed, so we actually don't know. So it's good to know that. It would be nice if somebody actually monitored that and just kind of.
Our lake is like 700 acres.
That's
So fairly large.
Yeah.
For this, which I think is probably the nursery area, is only like 5 acres. Is that possible?
Yes, that's very typical actually. So we have a grad student. She's not here, picture Justine. She's been looking at a chain of metro lakes, Lake Phelan chain of lakes. So there's like 4 or 5 lakes. They're all fairly deep. And there are 2 ponds way upstream. One is like 3 acres and one is like 8 acres. They are the nurseries. They are producing tens of thousands of carp in most years. And even though few of those little guys trickle downstream, if they can survive for 50 years, it just builds up. So yes, it's very possible that is the nursery. It doesn't take much.
Would this be a simpler problem, being this such a small thing to?
Well, if it's just one nursery, it's one connection, then you can try to isolate it. I mean, sometimes barriers don't make any sense at all. Sometimes they do. This may be the case where a simple barrier could help a lot.
Do they have any, are these carp traps a thing of the past?
I don't know, but I think so. We've tried because we know that so many of them move between lakes. It's a golden opportunity, right? You have the whole population moving through if you could trap them. We tried for 3 or 4 years now. We built those fences. We built 2 fences to trap them in between. We put a net behind them. We haven't been able to successfully trap them. It's sometimes when there's no fence, they move like crazy. If you put the fence in, they'll actually stage in the lake, a quarter mile downstream, and they won't go up until the big water comes and blows a hole in the fence, and then they go. So I think they sort of are the thing of the past.
Do you believe winter seining on the ice is the best way to get rid of the big ones then? Or is there...
Currently, yeah, because it works, it's simple. You don't use any toxins, you don't harm the environment. It's business for the fishermen. Yeah, I think it's a good way.
What's the reason we don't see more of that then? Is there no use for those carp, or
yeah.
what's the issue? Because the lakes around here, there's tons of lakes. I would think they'd be able to fill trucks full of them.
Yeah, I think there's no market.
That's one issue, but the market has fallen out for it. The second issue is now that we're infested with zebra mussels, they do not want to contaminate their nets. And that's what we're running into.
Yeah.
What would be the cost of a sportsman club group or somebody in the area doing it themselves, or bringing them in and then just dispose them as fertilizer or livestock feed or whatever?
We usually pay $5,000 per seine.
5,000 per seine?
And that's a whole day deal, and usually there is like 10 people involved, so it's a pretty sizable operation.
And in how many ton or pounds of fish they normally get?
Well, it ranges between 0 and lots and lots, so it really depends on the day. So sometimes we have to go back and several times and try it. But even the simple sort of seining operation can be improved a lot, because carp are very sensitive to sound, so you have to be quiet. And one thing we found out is, if we find the aggregation, if you can surround them with a net really quickly, you tend to be successful. If that process takes time and you make noise, those fish move out of the area very quickly. So what we do sometimes is, we find the aggregation, we drill the holes around them, and we stretch twine underneath the ice, just like a pre-lining it. And if they stay, then we're like, okay, we come back the next day, and using the line, we can pull the net really quickly. And that has improved our efficiency. So yeah, there's simple things that you could do to make it more effective.
When we got them commercial fishermen, they were from South Dakota, but there was about 15 guys on that crew, and they were at our public access, and they got everything orientated right there. I mean, it took them like an hour to get, here's what we're going to do. They just took off out in the lake, drilled a hole, they put 2 submarines down, and they ran that net around quick as possible. I'm thinking it was probably an hour they had the net set. And the net was about a mile long, half mile each way. And it was pretty amazing. In 4 hours they were done.
What did you have to pay that group?
Well, they did it for nothing the first time, and that's another thing. The lake is full of rocks, and so they got caught on the rocks and tore their net. And like you were saying, as soon as the carp find the hole, one goes through the hole, it's like a chain reaction. All of a sudden you got 10,000 carp going through that hole at one time. So the second time we got them out there, same thing happened. We had it sonared, and we thought we knew where all the rocks were. Well, they found another one, and they were so upset that they said they weren't going to come back. Well, we didn't want that, so we ended up paying them $3,000, which was their mobilization cost. And that's when they caught 80,000 pounds, and they were really happy. And at that time, though, there was a market out east. So they took 2 of them. We had 3 semis full of carp. 2 of them were live tanks. So they kept them alive, brought them out east. They actually put them in holding ponds, like cattle ponds, and because they use them for a religious thing out there that they use the carp for, and they got good money for them. And the regular carp were fairly good at that time. I think they were like 15 or 16 cents a pound, which is pretty good. In the last couple of years now, it's went way down. And the buffalo carp, which was what they were looking, they really liked them because they get high. Now their prices have dropped, so.
Can you chemically treat nursery areas?
You can. I think it would be, if you're dealing with some of those marshes winter kill maybe once every 10 years, so if you keep an eye on them and if you see, there's an infrequent event, then you could treat it. If you have one that winter kills almost every single year, if you would have to treat it almost continuously, then that would be very expensive and probably not sustainable.
What about killing them electrically or to get them to come up and then in a small pond like he had, just 5 acres?
Well, you can use electric barriers to block the nursery, so the adults cannot get back in there. Removing fish with electricity, like electric fishing boats, that's
Slow or
that's
costly?
That's not doable.
It's gonna be pretty close to them.
Yeah. Yes.
We stock walleyes in Lake Erie. Would it be beneficial to stock bluegills?
I wouldn't mess too much with the fish community. It looks like it's a fairly balanced community at this point. I'm looking at the data here.
But what for another lake that doesn't have a bluegill population?
Yes, but then you have to keep it alive through winter, right? Because they're sensitive to low oxygen. So if you can aerate the lake, then you can stock bluegills and they'll do just fine. In Lake Mary, this is bluegill trap net catch rate 11 on average. It's not bad. It's the metro lakes go from about 5 to 30 usually. So let's see what they say. Where's the bluegill trap net? 11. Yeah, the normal is 4 to 50. So it's not high, but again, if you're not seeing small carp in the lake, this one, then you're probably fine. I wouldn't.
I've heard from the DNR that if you isolate the carp in a lake, don't let them get to the nursery, they'll just adapt and spawn in the lake. Are you seeing that happen in the metro lakes?
I don't know, but trying to think of the places where we actually block the nursery. Yeah, there's one chain of lakes where they will keep trying to go up. They can. So I bet they turn around and spawn, but it's fine. I mean, they can spawn in the lake, but if you have a healthy fish community in the lake, it's okay. But they'll keep trying every year.
The procedures that you're doing, are you seeing that being adopted nationwide or wide across Minnesota, or is it too new yet?
I think the word is getting out there that those sort of new findings are around and there's new ways to control carp, and maybe that's why you guys are interested.
Yeah.
Whether it's adopted, there are maybe 3 or 4 watershed districts in the metro area that are interested in this work and actually funding something similar to this at different stages. Some of it is just figuring out how to control them. Other watersheds are actually controlling them. Where it could be adopted nationwide, I don't know. Different regions have different fish and different things probably regulate carp abundance. So, like we did some work in eastern Oregon, some of the national wildlife refuges down there, and it's a totally different ballgame. There's no bluegills, native fish are totally different. Lakes are even more productive than here. It's a huge carp problem. Our solutions probably couldn't be directly applied to those systems. You have to kind of be more, specific.
To my understanding, you currently have a research study in a chain of lakes in southern Minnesota. How long has that been going on, and when could we possibly get some feedback?
Southern Minnesota. I guess if you consider Twin Cities to be southern Minnesota, then yes.
That's not so. Okay,
so this is where we are right now. So we've been working in the metro area since 2006.
Okay.
And some of it has been funded through LCCMR. Some of it has been funded through watershed districts. Now we have the Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center at the university. And that, the aim of that center is to provide management solutions for aquatic invasive species that could be applied throughout the state. So using that money, I think I will be looking more at lakes in the southern Minnesota, because that's where the problem is most severe.
Right.
So that's coming. It's not happening yet.
Okay. So
And
that's-
meanwhile, we're sort of working with the Metro Watershed District to continue the work that I was describing, to kind of control the population, see if it's working, adaptive management, see if anything should be tweaked, and,
You were saying that when you got some of these lakes, you got the carp population down, you said the bluegill growth, was it the growth rate that increased? Did you notice anything with population increasing? No data on that.
It's hard to say because they were getting fished out really fast. So what we did see is that before we removed the carp, if you look at the DNR fish surveys going back, several years, the bluegills in that particular lake were not very abundant, and they were fairly small. Once we removed the carp, we all of a sudden saw these 9-inch plus bluegills, big bluegills. And we actually did a population estimate. I forgot how many thousands there were. But we had a grad student looking at the amount of fishing that was going on, and he figured out that, 80% of those big fish got fished out in 2 months. So it's hard to keep up with anglers. I mean, they just, but they were growing fast, beautiful fish.
Well, part of the reason for my question is, I'm from Lake Mary, we used to do the carp removal that we talked about. And I had a resorter relay a story to me 20 years ago, as he says back in the 60s when they first put the carp traps in and started removing a lot of carp, he said there was hardly any sunfish in Lake Mary. And he said when you knock the population of carp down, he thought, it was his impression that the sunfish expanded because the sunfish is a bedding fish and you didn't have the carp rooting around in the shallows. And he was of the impression that the sunfish population really improved when the carp population was knocked down. And I was just curious if you had data.
Yeah, I think that may be the case. Yeah, I don't really know. We haven't been looking at the bluegill. It takes a long time to actually control an entire lake. What I mean by that is, that you have 400 kilograms per hectare, you bring it down to 40. And then you can tell, okay, is native fish community changing? And you have to look at least a few years before and a few years after. We only have 2 lakes so far where we changed the carp biomass a lot. And there's a third one coming up. So there aren't a lot of data to look at that. A lot of places, a lot of carp are being removed, but you don't know how many are left in the lake. So sometimes you see a change and you don't know, well, maybe we removed all the carp or most of them. Maybe not. Maybe the change is just caused by something else. It's hard to say.
We have a lot of good lake associations like Mary and others in the Alexandria Lakes area, plus statewide, and sportsmen's groups. And is the department thinking about putting some kind of model together for private groups that have willing participants to do these kind of things, or find out where these rearies are for the young ones? Any thought that way? And then is it fairly easy to tag them? Is the cost of tagging, and so you can track those fish, is that fairly inexpensive? We've got a bunch of retired folks here. They tag some fish in the wintertime and follow them in the spring?
Yes, there's a lot that could be done relatively easily.
You know what I'm getting at. You hire
Right.
professionals, the cost goes through the roof, and
Yes.
it's a do-it-yourself world for the common guy today.
Yes. I think we are sort of in the, the center is relatively new. It's
But it sounds like sound science.
Yes, the science is sound, and it's everybody's intention to expand it and make it applied in different places. I think that's one of the reasons why we have those workshops, so that people can come over and see what's going on. And we are always happy to do more work. What we typically do is we hire a grad student or two, and we are looking for at least 2 or 3 years of funding, because that's how much it takes for a student to graduate, and some equipment, and I mean, usually it's a substantial amounts of money. I think that there will be more interest from the private business sector to do some of those things. I think that, which is great. I think that the sort of thing to be slightly careful about is make sure that you understand the system before you actually start controlling it. Because if you go back into, well, I don't know, I keep hearing from the DNR guys that, in 30s, 40s, and 50s, they had carp removal crews, and all they did was removing carp, and that hasn't worked in a lot of places. So again, removing adults is fine, but you really have to look at the whole picture. So, long story short, I think we would eventually like to get to a place where those techniques could be applied. The infrastructure is not really there yet. I mean, I don't know of any private business who could do this sort of thing holistically. There may be soon, I don't know. We can certainly do work like this if there is funding behind it. And so a lot of it is, I mean, in lakes where we work, we use volunteers too. It's some of those techniques are fairly simple.
Are you the only DNR team that's actually doing this, or are there other teams doing the same thing that you're doing?
Right. So we are a university, right?
Well, you're a university.
Yes,
you're not DNR.
Right. There are other groups in the country that are doing maybe not quite the same things, but I think in Minnesota we may be the only one. There was one group in Wisconsin that is sort of doing similar things, including telemetry and the removal of the adults. I don't think they're looking at nursery areas and how to control the young.
What was the cost of the budget you have to do this study?
Oh boy.
On an annual basis?
Well, usually it comes down to $200,000 a year.
So we had 5 groups in the state doing it, it'd be $1 million.
Well, so for that you would have to hire more than just a couple of students, because if you have
But what I'm saying is put 5 teams like you to be in different parts of the state. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yes, but that's that's doing things through the university, which I may be getting myself into a lot of trouble here. But I mean,
you're doing a good job.
Universities function is a different way than private business, right?
Sure.
I don't know which one is cheaper, but universities have administrative overhead costs, and we tend not to have a lot of equipment, and it's, I don't know exactly how much it should cost. I don't know what.
Right, but you're a base. That's what I was getting at, to give my audience and concerned citizens like this to get some thought process in their head when they talk to their legislator their DNR people.
So for example, to cover a reasonable chain of lakes, say, 3, 4, 5, 6 lakes, you basically need 2 people hired full time.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
And just that takes quite a bit of money. On top of that, you have the university cost, you have telemetry, radio tags, electrofishing boats, stuff like that. So
what's that particular function cost? To put that in enough fish to be meaningful to follow them, and then the telemetry to follow them, or whatever, the tag itself, what does that cost?
Telemetry is actually probably the cheapest part of the whole thing, because it sounds a lot, it's $200 per tag, but they last at least 2 years. You can put 20 in a lake, so that's $4,000, and you're set for 2 years. A receiver is $2,000. It's easy to use. It's easy to train people how to. That's cheap, relatively speaking.
But that's maybe where, like, this group could start, by getting a few tags. Because you brought up this nursery, I couldn't tell you. I don't have a clue. We know they travel. In Lake Mary, they go to Skoglund Slough, and they come back. So you've answered a big piece of why do they do this. Nursery, So if we invested in tagging a few and tracked them for 2-3 years,
I think that would be
Is that a good starting point?
I think it would be a good way to start, and
Okay.
Probably you would get the most bang for your buck
okay,
doing that. Another good thing is to collect some fish for aging, just to see how old they are.
okay,
Sometimes you look at the, a random sample of carp from a lake, and you see that there is 9-year-olds and there are 15-year-olds. They're just 2-year classes. So then you go back through time and say, oh, what happened 5 years ago or 9 years ago? And you can work with the DNR guys. They have a lot of historical records. You can say, that's when we built the ditch, or that's when we put the barrier. And you kind of figure out, an explanation for what's going on.
because we do have limited funds, so I guess from my point of view, I'm looking for guidance. What is a good starting point where we get the most for the monies we do have, so we can get some research, so we can get some feedback to present to University of Minnesota and say, okay, here's our findings.
Yeah, I think that telemetry is a good starting point because you will learn a lot.
Okay.
You'll use it in the spring when they spawn, you use it in winter when they aggregate. It's,
Okay. Super.
I just had one question on when you were saying that you put the telemetry in the fish and they went into that one spawning lake and spawned, but the fish from Susan Lake that spawned, they came back to Susan after they were done spawning?
Yep.
None of them went over to Riley Lake?
Yep.
Huh, that's amazing.
I know.
Any thought of why that is?
Ask Carp.
They're smart.
That's what I don't know why they. Well, I kind of understand why they go to the nursery area.
Sure, but
Why
why
they
would-
leave, and not every single one of them leaves. Sometimes they stay, and they die because of winter kills. But the ones that do leave, they go back to their home lake. And I guess the more interesting question to me is how they do it. How do they know that they're going from this lake to that lake and not upstream or downstream? I think that they just know where they are. They remember the environment enough so that they can orient themselves. And there is a lot of evidence among fish that they have this what we call spatial memory, that they just kind of remember landmarks. And if you think that those fish live for a long time,
You said it's a worldwide problem. Is there any new research either on sexuality as far as using the mating season type thing to attract them to an area? Anything that you are aware of?
Yeah, so at the university we have a fish pheromone expert, Dr. Peter Sorensen, who is working on those things. And those things have a lot of potential because carp are, like many other fish, they're not necessarily very visual fish. The males recognize females like dogs. They just sniff each other. They know what's going on. They know who is mature, who is not. They know when there's time to spawn. So pheromones could play a big role in controlling carp. I don't know that there are any things that could be applied right away to, for example, cause them to aggregate. Spawning time is a little tricky. They do find each other and they aggregate, but you're not dealing with one massive aggregation of fish. Usually there's several groups throughout the lake. There are other things that are coming up, well, not necessarily coming up, but being looked at. There's a group in Australia that has been working on genetically modifying carp so that they cannot produce any female offspring. And thinking is that there's more than one way to do it. I believe they have been able to produce a fish like that survived in the lab. And they ran them through one generation. The offspring was mainly males. The thinking is that if you could bring down the existing population to a low number and then put a significant number of those genetically modified fish, they should breed themselves out of existence over a couple generations, which still may be a long time. Now those fish are not being released anywhere at this point, but they have been. It's been done. I mean, they exist. So I don't know when or how or even if this will be used, but it's something that could be used. Now, sort of looking a couple decades back, there is a center in La Crosse that is a fish toxicology center. They work in fish toxins, and there's at least one or two that have been tested many years ago. They look promising. Problem is that they're not specific, so they would kill every fish that eats them. But carp have sort of specific diet. Like we do experiments in lakes with corn. We put a bunch of corn and see if you can attract them, and you can, and they learn where it is. You can train them actually to come to you. And we've been putting cameras under the water to see who shows up at the bait, and it's just carp. Bluegills don't eat it. Obviously, walleyes don't eat it. Bullheads don't eat it. Buffalo don't eat it. So it's just carp. So you could use that, and maybe in combination with some sort of a toxin to produce carp-specific toxin delivery system. So that, again, this is not being used anywhere at this point, but it probably could be, and I think that it probably will be.
Are you talking about putting sweet corn in or regular dent corn?
Just regular cracked corn, dry corn. Sweet corn is better, but more expensive.
Yeah, that's what I did then. You could definitely afford to treat regular corn.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got that Lazard Sam's funding available, and that amounts to $100 million a year in the clean water part of it, which is just 1/3 of that money that comes in. And that money is money we put in there. It's, our money. So I would think that that's designated for clean water, and this is what we're talking about. So I don't know where else you're going to get that kind of money, and our senator from here is on that Lazard Sam's committee, and right up there. But it would have to include the excuse me, the whole state. I mean, we couldn't just say our, but that's a resource that should be tapped. This is the right thing for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it will be tapped because so Lazard Sam's doesn't typically support just basic research. So we tend, I'm maybe getting myself in trouble again. I don't think we have been funded by that particular source, simply because they're not research oriented. They're not meant to be funding research. But we're at the stage where this could be used and applied. And as I understand, there's a certain application process, and your lake association probably could apply for control, as long as you have a reasonable plan that seems kind of comprehensive, and
We
see why not.
We do have a lakes expert here from the county there. Sir, I filmed you before and you did a good job. What's your thought on some of this stuff? Your title is county, right?
Yeah,
State your name and your position, sir.
I'm Steve Henry, county water planner.
Speak loud.
And I think that's a great point there with the Lazard Sam's dollars. The clean water is kind of a tough one, but they do have dollars set aside for fish. They've had a hard time getting their mind around what do you do to help fish populations. Currently they fund projects in trout streams, sinking logs and other habitat features, but beyond that, fisheries has not been able to really put forward a good grant application to tap into those dollars. And just because it should go statewide doesn't mean we need to pilot it somewhere on maybe a whole, since we have 5 watersheds that start here, they leave our borders, we obviously have maybe 5 opportunities there for test studies.
part of the reason I ask you, obviously you follow the watersheds in the area. You must have had a lot of bells and whistles going off in your mind as far as in this watershed, there's this little lake and the next watershed down. I know where those carp are now spawning. Any thoughts on that?
Well, exactly. Some of us spear carp in the spring, and we've always known the carp go down out of Mary, but go up out of Mill, and what lies in between is Skoglund Slough and Beaver Dam Pond. Skoglund's being the deeper of the two, I would guess that Beaver Dam Pond is probably our nursery.
How big an acreage is that?
Oh, 20, maybe.
Yeah.
16. But it has a history of going dry more than Skoglund's, which is deeper, I believe.
Yes.
So there is a lot of anecdotal information we could look at in some of the systems to narrow down based on where we've seen dispersion preferentially go what might be nurseries.
And even a department like yours, potentially what he's doing there, you could manage some of the process he's doing, couldn't you?
We'd be happy to house the transponder, the receiver, if there was multiple lakes that wanted to look into
Tagging some fish.
tagging some fish and then splitting the cost of the receiver.
That's what I'm getting at.
We'd be happy to house that, keep it serviced and available, and that's what we do with water quality instruments for the groups. We try and keep our meter working.
Because I think to really accomplish it, you got to get the general public involved, yet you want them on an educated basis. You want somebody like him watching so we don't have rednecks getting too out of control.
I'm not touching it.
Well, I tell you, with Dr. Bejer's research, I have such a clear understanding of carp. And I look at it, it's a three-pronged approach. We in Lake Mary, and you guys have been on the board many years, I've only been on the board 10, we only address the adults. And you have brought up such valuable points, finding that nursery. Where are the 1 to 2 year olds? Never even asked the questions before because we've only targeted the adults. This makes sense. This has answered so many questions to why our past efforts have failed. And I don't know how other lake boards feel, but I think us pooling our monies, our limited resources together and getting fish tagged and purchasing the receiver, I think it's a good starting point.
We did it with walleyes back in
Yeah.
93, 94, something that time frame. What about how these small fish you talk about? How do you catch those, or would you sample like some of these sloughs? Do you have trap nets, or what?
Yes,
What do you do there?
I'm trying to think if I have pictures of that. Yeah, it's just a typical, we use DNR trap nets, so nothing.
So if we could put those in random spaces, that
Yeah.
would give us a fairly good idea of where they are or are not.
Yes, they are very effective.
You mentioned
Yep.
baiting or chumming repetitively. Do you think that could actually be used on the edge of a marsh just to test for observance of small carp?
Yeah, Weekly Grassroots was actually trying that. Like he would put minnow traps, those small plastic traps. You have to do it early when the carp is small to get it cycle state. Yeah, but if you do that in early July, put a little sweet corn inside, they'll go in. They're easy to catch. They're not. If you have a nursery, you'll know that right away. I mean, this is just looking at how many are usually caught. So usually between 5 and 200 in every single trap. So it's not like you'll miss them. Yeah.
Linda, another resource for us might be is because of the walleye studies that were going on in Lake Mary, the DNR has quite a few records of electrofishing. And I don't know if they document any carp when they catch them or not. That would
No, but
be a
that's
good
what I
thing to
plan to
ask
ask
them about.
Dean Beck, the
Yes.
electrofish for walleye. Are they keeping data on any other fish?
Just a comment on that is when we electrofish for carp, I think we sort of developed over time kind of carp specific approach, because if you just slowly go around the lake along the shore, you'll catch some, but they really like, for example, trees and, you know, places where they can...
I mean, the target there is walleye, so you're not catching any.
Exactly.
Be curious if they're catching any small ones at all.
Oh, I see, I see.
To see if they're.
To kind of confirm what you're saying about.
Sure, yeah, but even better if you look at the gill net catches and trap nets, and this is just one of them. This is 2013. I think they usually do that every 3 or 5 years. You know,
Something like that.
Yeah, so if you look at those past records, and they tend, I would bet that they set at least 5 or 6 or whatever nets in the lake, so it's pretty, I mean, they are using better protocols than we do, so
right.
this is pretty good data
They
set.
do a pretty good survey.
Yeah.
As far as what would you think if we would get, say, 5 groups in the Alexandria Lakes area to do some tagging of some of these in 5 different watersheds or 5 different lake associations? What would be the easiest and best time to catch these fish to put the transmitter in?
Good question. I would say stay away from the middle of the summer, because when the water is the warmest, they tend to get sick more often. And I would also say hire somebody or ask somebody who has done it for help. Because we've trained graduate students and they're all I know how to do is easy. And they do it, and then half of the fish die a month later. Little things make a big difference. So.
Can you explain to us what the process is or how big the transmitter is?
Sure. So ideally I would say put the tags in, say, September, October. The best way is to catch the fish with an electrofishing boat, because that doesn't harm the fish as well, as much. We catch 2 or 3 at a time, put them in a live well, put one in a container with an anesthetic that puts the fish to sleep, anesthetize it. We turn it upside down, we make a small incision.
In the belly area or in the flesh or what?
In the belly.
Belly.
So the radio tag sits actually in the body cavity.
Okay,
and
that's what I was getting at.
And the antenna sticks outside.
Okay.
And the size, it's basically a AA battery with a little bit of electronics behind it, and then a wire antenna that's maybe 12 inches long.
And the antenna stays in the cavity too, or
No,
that's outside?
Antenna is outside. And it's a local company from Minnesota who makes that stuff.
Okay.
So.
What about the size of a shotgun shell?
Yes.
The ones they
Yep.
use in the walleyes?
Yeah,
Size of
exactly.
shotgun cell, okay.
Yeah. And you release the fish, and they tend to do quite well. We usually lose less than 10% of the fish that we implant. And those radio tags can have different features. For example, some of them have mortality options, so the fish dies. If the tag doesn't move, say for 2 days, it starts double beeping, so then you know that it's a dead fish. Some of them have temperature sensors, so the warmer the water, the faster it beeps. I mean, there is depth. There's different, but I would recommend the simple ones that have mortality option, because sometimes they move a lot, sometimes they don't move almost at all, and you're like, is this fish alive or is it dead? It's been not moving and then all of a sudden it moves. So it's kind of saves you a lot of time if you know that they're dead. It's a simple technology, but very reliable.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you give Informed TV your name and your rank or the university so we get it right? You're
Sure.
very informative.
So my name is Przemek Bayer, and I am a research assistant professor at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Lake Mary Association for allowing Informed TV to be here and ask some questions.
Actually, it's Douglas County Lakes Association.
Oh, it is the lake. Okay, I heard Lake Mary mentioned all the time. I thought it was just your group, but
Too many of us.
I'm glad to hear there is too many. I didn't mean to
Yes.
cite anybody, but a lot of the talk was on Lake Mary, so I appreciate that, and I salute all the work you folks do.
Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff from BluebirdChopper.com. I'm here to invite you to join our new Facebook group. It's a place on Facebook where you can post free classifieds. You can find it on Facebook just by searching for Bluebird Shopper. And once you're there, you just join it and you click one button to join, and you can go ahead and post free classifieds right on Facebook. And all of those posts that go into that Facebook group will automatically flow or be transferred onto the bluebirdshopper.com website. So check it out, and I hope you'll join our group. It's growing every day, and we're getting more and more things on there as it grows, of course. And if you're not on Facebook, check out, you can still use our website, of course, at www.bluebirdshopper.com.
You're watching Informed TV, Alexandria, Minnesota.